Imagine that Acoustic Machines of Tartaria, an invention that healed people with sound, not pills, is not a myth, but something that was deliberately hidden. Kiev, 1896. Pavilion number 4. Restorers open a wooden crate marked, "Do Not Strike." Inside are curved bronze fragments, serial numbers, and a strange symbol made of 2 overlapping circles. The catalog calls them decoration. But then why does a light touch make the metal emit a hum at exactly 112 hertz, strong enough to make nearby glass vibrate? And then it gets worse. There is a photograph from that same hall, a large bell hanging above something that looks like a generator. But in later prints, the bell is simply erased, as if it was never there. Paris, St. Petersburg, Chicago. The same signs appear again and again. Grooves inside bells like turbines, hidden cables, torn logbooks, dates that cannot be true. So, what were these bells really for? Music for? Churches or machines that someone decided people should never use again? If you're still watching, you already feel it. That quiet pull towards something that doesn't fit. Something archived, cataloged, and locked away. Not because it's dangerous, but because someone wanted the pattern to stop. Let's go back to where the threads first showed themselves. Winter, Kiev, 1896. The all-Russian industrial and art exhibition spreads across frozen ground like a small city. Pavilion 4, industrial machinery, steam engines, copper wire displays, heavy tools polished until they shine. Visitors crowd around bronze samples, turning them in their hands, amazed by the weight and by the tone they make when you even breathe near them. But in the back corner, away from the main platform, restorers open a shipment that arrived late. A wooden crate, reinforced corners, no sender listed, just a stenciled warning in 3 languages. Do not strike. Inside, curved. Bronze fragments, not bells, pieces of bells. Each fragment carries a serial number etched near the rim. And at the center of every piece, stamped into the metal itself, is the same mark. 2 circles. Overlapping, perfectly aligned. The catalog entry is short, almost bored. Acoustic ornaments, origin, foundry unknown, purpose, decorative. Decorative. That single word will cling to these objects for the next 100 years, like a label nobody dares to peel off. One of the restorers, his name never appears in the records, decides to test them anyway. Not a smash, not a swing, just a careful tap with a wooden mallet. What comes out is not a chime, it's a hum, low, steady, wrong in the way it refuses to die. Glass cases across the hall begin to vibrate. Dust lifts off flat surfaces as if the room exhales, and the tone holds for nearly 30 seconds before fading, far longer than bronze should ever resonate. Later, analysis will measure it at 112 hertz. Not approximate, not within range, exact. There is a photograph from that exhibition, black and white, slightly overexposed. It shows the center of Pavilion 4. Above the main platform hangs a large bell, easily 2 meters across, suspended over what looks like a cylindrical generator. Cables run from the base into the floor. The whole setup looks functional, purposeful, built to do something, not simply to be seen. But this is where the story fractures. Later prints of the same photograph, archived in Vienna, in London, and in private collections, show the same hall, the same angle, the same crowd. And the bell is gone. Not removed, painted out, brushed over with white pigment, leaving only a faint ghost outline where the suspension cables should be. No explanation in the margins, no correction note, just absence, presented like it was always normal. Official records describe the exhibition as a showcase of Russian industrial progress. Steam turbines, textile, machinery, agricultural tools. Nowhere do they mention bells, nowhere do they mention frequency. Nowhere do they explain why bronze fragments with identical serial numbers appear in shipping, manifests dated 1886, 10 years before the exhibition opened. The restorer's notes survive in a single ledger entry. Fragments produced unusual sustained tone, advised against public demonstration. Crate resealed per instruction from above. From above. Not from the exhibition organizers, not from the pavilion curator, from above. If this were isolated, a strange crate, a doctored photo, a confusing ledger, It would fade into the background noise of history. Mistakes happen, records get mixed, ink smears, files disappear, but then you find the manifests, bronze shipments, same weight ratios, same overlapping circle sigil, same foundry mark, or rather, the same absence of one, over and over again. Paris, 1873. St. Petersburg, 1881. Chicago, 1893. Birmingham, 1902. Each one labeled differently: ceremonial, ornamental, heritage, religious. Each one shipped without a listed destination. And each one disappears from public view within months, sometimes within weeks of arrival. So here's what we know. Someone built these objects. Someone shipped them across continents. Someone installed them in pavilions, cathedrals, and exhibition halls, places where thousands of people would see them, hear them, feel them. And then someone else made sure you never would. The question isn't only, what were these bells? The real question is this: why does every official record treat them like they were never meant to work? Because if they were only decoration, only art, only faith, only sound, then why the warning labels? Why the painted-out photographs? Why the torn logbook pages, the confiscated blueprints, and the shipments that show up 10 years before they're officially documented? Something refused to align. And the deeper you look, the less the safe explanations hold. So, let's follow the first breadcrumb trail. Let's go to the point where the catalog stops making sense, and where the foundries were really casting what they refused to name. The catalogs keep using the same phrase: acoustic ornaments. It shows up again and again in official records: Paris, St. Petersburg, Chicago, Birmingham, Kolkata. Acoustic ornaments, a harmless label, a soft name meant to make the problem disappear. But a catalog is supposed to do more than rename something. A real catalog tells you where it came from, who made it, and where it was installed. These don't. No foundry listed, no installation record, no tower construction note, no buyer's name in the ledger. Only numbers, weights, bronze ratios, crate dimensions, the kind of details you record when you don't want anyone to ask the next question. Then, buried inside A. Stasti, restoration log from St. Petersburg, 1891, there's one line that changes the entire tone. Object produces faint hum under certain lighting conditions. Cause unknown. Recommend storage in low light environment. Under certain lighting conditions. Not when struck, not when touched. When light hits it. That is not how bronze behaves. That is not how any normal metal behaves. You don't store an inert decorative object in darkness because light makes it vibrate. Unless it isn't inert, unless it isn't decorative. And right here, the first real question forms. Who ships a bell system with no destination? Because that's what the manifests show. Crates stamped fragile, acoustic, specialized handling, yet the recipient line is blank. The installation address is blank. Paris, 1873. A shipment arrives at the Palais de l'Industrie. 6 bronze fragments, total weight, 412 kilograms. Foundry, origin, none listed. The exhibition catalog calls them ceremonial elements from an unknown Eastern tradition. Eastern, that word does a lot of work. It means exotic. It means don't ask. It means the audience will accept mystery as culture and move on. But decades later, a museum conservator runs a chemical analysis without realizing what he's actually holding. And the results are stranger than the label. The bronze alloy doesn't match any known European or Asian foundry practice from that era. The tin to copper ratio is wrong. There's trace graphite, and there's an unusually high concentration of silver. Silver. Not to make it prettier. Silver increases conductivity. The same conservator notes something else. Marks on the interior surfaces. Not decorative engraving. Grooves, parallel. Evenly spaced, like the inside of a turbine or a resonance chamber. He writes, purpose unclear. Design suggests function beyond acoustic projection. Function beyond acoustic projection. He doesn't say what function, he doesn't speculate. He files the report and moves on, like he's learned not to stare too long. The fragments are moved to storage. The log is archived, no one follows up. But the pattern doesn't stop. It spreads. St. Petersburg, 1881. Cathedral installation records mention bronze elements delivered without prior commission. No zakaz, no request, no signature. The bishop's diary describes them as unexpectedly modern in finish, too clean, too precise, and lacking the traditional iconography expected for sacred use. Lacking traditional iconography, because they weren't made for churches. They were made to pass as church objects. Chicago, 1893. The World's Columbian Exposition. The official guide mentions acoustic demonstration pieces in the Electricity Building. Electricity Building. Not the Fine Arts Pavilion, not the Cultural Hall. Electricity. A visitor's letter, preserved in a private collection, describes what it felt like. The tone was unlike any bell I have heard. It did not fade as sound should. It lingered in the chest, as if the air itself continued to carry it long after the strike. It lingered in the chest, not just in the ears, in the body. 3 months after the exposition closes, the pieces are removed. No record of their next location, no sale, no transfer document, just gone. By 1900, the shape of the story is undeniable. Bronze objects appear in major cities, almost always during exhibitions or public events, always labeled as ceremonial, traditional, cultural, always pulled back out, quietly. And they leave behind just enough paperwork to prove they existed, but never enough to explain what they were meant to do. The catalogs say acoustic ornaments. The manifests say almost nothing. And the people closest to them, restorers, conservators, bishops, engineers, describe things that should not exist. A bell that hums without being struck. A metal that responds to light. A tone that doesn't die like sound should. And somewhere along the line, someone decided you didn't need to know why. So, let's go back further. Let's find the Foundry. Let's see what they were really casting before the records go dark. The Foundry sketch shouldn't exist. It's tucked into a private archive in Lyon, buried inside an estate sale from a metallurgist who died in 1928. No proper catalog entry, no clear label, just a loose sheet in a box of unrelated papers. For years, nobody knew what it was, until someone finally looked at it the right way. The sketch shows a bell, but the interior is wrong. Instead of a smooth casting, the inside is carved with grooves, deep, precise, spiraling from the crown down to the rim. They don't look decorative, they look engineered, more like the inside of a turbine, or a resonance chamber, or a device designed to move air in one very specific pattern. In the margin, in faded ink, there's a note. Not for the ear, for the air itself. Not for the ear, that single phrase flips everything we assume about bells. Bells exist to be heard, that's the point. You cast them, tune them, hang them in towers so the sound carries across streets and rooftops. But this note points to something else. A bell designed not to make sound people hear, but vibration people feel. The sketch is dated 1873. The same year, bronze fragments appear at the Palais de l'Industrie in Paris. The same year, witnesses start describing something they can't quite explain. A priest at Saint-Sulpice, one of the largest churches in Paris, writes in his personal diary about a demonstration he attended. He doesn't name the organizer. He doesn't name the location. He simply records what happened, like he wants it remembered, but not traced. The bell was struck once. The tone was clear, but not loud. What followed was unexpected. A vibration deep in the chest, as if one's ribs had become a second bell. The sensation persisted long after the ringing stopped. Perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps more. Several attendees appeared distressed. One woman fainted. The demonstration was not repeated. Deep in the chest, not in the ears, not even in the air around them, in the body. That's not how ordinary sound behaves, unless the frequency is low enough, sustained enough, and strong enough to bypass hearing and go straight into physical resonance. 112 hertz sits close to that line. You don't just listen to it, you feel it. And if the bell interior is grooved to sustain that frequency, if the shape stretches the vibration instead of letting it die, then what you've built isn't a musical instrument, it's a machine. This is the moment the story changes. This is where it stops looking like music and starts looking like engineering. Because if someone in 1873 knew how to design a bell that could generate a sustained low-frequency vibration strong enough to affect the human body, then someone knew which frequency to target. Someone knew what effect it would cause. Someone knew how to build it. The sketch includes measurements. Thickness at the crown, 42 millimeters. Diameter at the rim, 190 centimeters. Interior groove depth, 8 millimeters. Groove angle, 15 degrees. Those are not artistic flourishes. Not close enough. Not the kind of thing you eyeball. Those are specifications. Specifications imply testing. Testing implies prototypes. Prototypes imply purpose. You don't accidentally design a bell that makes people's ribs vibrate. You don't stumble into a frequency that triggers physical resonance by chance. You build it on purpose. But the sketch opens another question, one that cuts even deeper. If this design worked, if it produced the effect described, why? Isn't it in Foundry records? Why isn't it patented? Why isn't it discussed in public engineering journals from that era? The metallurgist who owned the sketch left no explanation. His estate inventory lists it as decorative architectural drawing, origin unknown. Decorative, there's that word again. The same word used for the fragments in Kiev, the same word used in Paris, St. Petersburg, and Chicago. It isn't a description, it's a dismissal, a way to file something real under a harmless label, a way to make sure no one looks twice. Because if you call it decorative, nobody asks what it's for. Nobody asks why it's built the way it's built. Nobody asks who designed it, or why they knew exactly how deep to cut the grooves. The priest ends his diary entry with one last line. I do not believe we were meant to feel what we felt. He's right, but someone built it anyway. Now, let's see what happens when these bells appear in a place designed to hold them. Let's see what happens when the grooves, the cables, and the frequencies come together inside a structure that was never officially called a machine, but functioned like one. The priest's diary ends with unease, but in St. Petersburg, 1881, someone takes that unease and builds a structure around it. St. Isaac's Cathedral, one of the largest Orthodox cathedrals in the world. A gold dome that catches the sky, granite columns that make people look small, a building designed to overwhelm you with awe. And yet, the construction drawings suggest something else was planned inside that awe. In the Russian State Historical Archive, there's a set of blueprints dated 1879, 2 years before the bell installation. They show the interior dome structure. At first glance, it looks standard. Wooden framework, copper sheeting, support beams, except for one detail. Running from the bell chamber down through the dome framework are metal rods, copper, precisely spaced, regular, deliberate intervals, and they connect the bells directly to the outer copper dome. Not support rods, not ornament, not decoration, conductive rods. The drawings are labeled in Russian. Near the rod system, there's an annotation. Lightning protection and resonance stabilization. Lightning protection makes sense. Copper conducts. You ground a dome to reduce strike damage, but resonance stabilization. That phrase appears nowhere else in Orthodox cathedral architecture from this era. It's not a standard term. It's not a known building practice. It reads like a phrase invented to explain something without naming it. Then there's the maintenance log. A deacon records an incident during a storm, dated 1883. Bells rang during the lightning. This is expected. What was not expected? The ringing continued for several minutes after the storm passed. Those present in the nave reported a sensation of pressure in the chest and a faint ringing in the ears that persisted even after the bells fell silent. Several worshippers became dizzy. One woman described a tingling in her hands. Bells ringing during. Lightning expected. A grounded dome can pick up energy. Metal reacts. Bells can sing. But the ringing continuing after the storm, minutes later, that is not normal. And the physical sensations, pressure, tingling, dizziness, match what the priest described in Paris a decade earlier. Not sound. Something that hits the body. The deacon's log continues. Upon inspection, the bell rods were found to be warm to the touch, though no fire was present. The copper dome exhibited a faint vibration that could be felt when one placed a hand upon the interior surface. Warm to the touch. Metal doesn't stay warm after a storm passes. Not unless current ran through it. Not unless something traveled down those rods into the dome and lingered, and that's the shift. In Paris, the bell stands alone, a demonstration piece, a prototype. In St. Petersburg, the bell is integrated. It's wired into the building. The rods link the bell chamber to the copper dome. The dome becomes part of the system, not just as a roof, not just as a symbol, as a resonance chamber, not for sound, for something that makes metal warm and air vibrate. Long after the first strike, the logbook continues for another 6 months, routine entries, bell maintenance, candle counts, weather notes. Then it stops. The final entry is dated March 18th, 1884. The page after that is torn out, not missing. Torn. You can see the ragged edge still bound into the spine, proof that someone pulled it free on purpose. What remains is one phrase at the bottom of the previous page, written in a different hand, smaller, tighter, rushed. Completed as instructed, not as designed. Completed as instructed, not as designed. 2 authorities, 2 intentions. Someone designed the system. Someone else dictated how it would be finished. And whoever gave those instructions made sure the final record disappeared. By 1886, the rods are removed. The official reason: structural reinforcement no longer required due to improved dome anchoring. Structural reinforcement. But the drawings called them resonance stabilization. The deacon described them as warm. The worshippers described them as disturbing. 3 explanations for the same object. None of them align. The bells remain, the dome remains, but the connection between them is cut. And whatever the rods were doing, whatever made the dome vibrate, the metal heat, and the congregation feel pressure in their chests, that stops. No incident report, no public note, no announcement from the church, just a torn page and a phrase that should not exist in any normal maintenance ledger. Completed as instructed, not as designed, which means someone knew what the design was meant to do, and someone else decided it should not do it anymore. By now, the pattern is no longer a set of strange accidents. It's coordinated. Paris, a prototype. St. Petersburg, full. Architectural integration. And then, quietly, carefully, someone begins erasing the connections. Not the bells. The bells can stay. They can hang there as symbols, as decorative artifacts. But the rods, the cables, the systems that make them work, those have to go. Now, let's track the timeline. Let's see what happens when the records themselves start to fracture. Someone starts erasing the connections, but they don't erase everything. They can't, because bureaucracy runs on paper, and paper leaves traces, even when the pages that matter get torn out. The Russian State Archive holds 14 volumes of construction records for St. Isaac's Cathedral. Volume 7 covers the years 1879 through 1885. On page 143, an entry dated April 9, 1882, describes the completion of the bell rod installation. On page 144, an entry dated April 9, 1882, describes the same installation, but with a completion date of November 12, 1884. Same handwriting, same ink, same cold bureaucratic phrasing. 2 entries, same day. 2 completion dates, 2 years apart. That isn't a normal clerical mistake. Clerical mistakes are swapped digits, misspelled names, a wrong month number. You don't accidentally write the same entry twice on consecutive pages with contradictory dates, unless someone forced you to rewrite the record, unless someone told you to move the timeline. And the question is, why? What happens between 1882 and 1884 that makes the official completion date slide forward, then get dragged backward into a different year? The archive gives no explanation, no correction note, no margin mark, no annotation, just 2 entries that cannot both be true. And once you see that, you start noticing the same crack in other places. Paris, 1873. The Foundry sketch is dated June, but the exhibition fragments appear in February, 4 months before the design is supposedly finalized. Chicago, 1893. The exposition opens in May, but shipping manifests show bronze fragments arriving in October 1892, labeled for Electricity Building Installation, World's Columbian Exposition, 7 months early. Except the electricity building isn't finished until March 1893. So, where were the fragments for those months? No storage record, no holding facility note, no ledger page saying kept under guard, or held in warehouse, or awaiting installation. They arrive, they vanish from documentation, and then they reappear, right on schedule, inside the exposition. The timeline doesn't crack in one place. It fractures everywhere you look. Kiev, 1896. The fragments in Pavilion 4 carry serial numbers that date them to 1886. But the all-Russian exhibition isn't even announced until 1894, 10 years early. A decade before anyone publicly knows the exhibition will exist, someone is already casting fragments with serial numbers that will later appear there, which means one of two things. Either the fragments were repurposed, built for something else, then relabeled later, or someone knew about the exhibition 10 years before it was publicly conceived. And neither explanation fits cleanly. Repurposing would leave fingerprints in the paperwork. An original manifest, an original destination, a paper trail showing the change. There isn't one. And exhibitions don't get planned in secret for 10 years. They're public projects. Government-backed, debated, funded, announced in newspapers, argued over in councils. So, if you search Russian records for mentions of an 1896 industrial exhibition before 1894, you find nothing. The first reference appears in March 1894 in a Moscow engineering journal. Preliminary discussions underway for a national exhibition celebrating industrial progress. Preliminary, not confirmed, not funded, not designed. Yet fragments cast in 1886 already carry serial numbers that place them in Pavilion 4. This is the point where the audience understands the real choice. Either these records were written in a rush and nobody checked the dates, or the records were rewritten on purpose to hide when these objects were actually built and why. But rushed records leave other scars: different handwriting, ink that doesn't match, crossed out lines, smudges, corrections, uneven phrasing. These documents show none of that. Same hand, same ink, same mechanical precision. Which means whoever adjusted the timeline didn't hurry. They took their time. They made the rewrite look seamless. The only reason we can see the crack at all is simple. They wrote the same entry twice and failed to remove the first version. One mistake in an otherwise clean erasure, and that mistake reveals something worse than confusion. It reveals intention. You don't rewrite a timeline by accident. You don't insert completion dates 2 years apart unless you're trying to hide when something was actually finished. You don't stamp fragments 10 years early unless you want them to look like they were always meant to be harmless, always decorative, never functional. This is not one strange bell. This is not a cataloging slip. It's a repeating pattern across cities, across decades, across borders. Bronze objects that hum at exact frequencies, rods that conduct more than lightning, records that say one thing on one page and something else on the next. And every time someone tries to follow the thread, the paperwork fractures just enough to make you doubt your own eyes. As if you're not seeing a pattern at all, just a long chain of unrelated mistakes that happen to look identical. So, let's stop assuming mistakes. Let's follow the pattern where it's clearest. Let's go to Chicago, where the bells don't just appear. They're photographed, they're documented, and they're connected to something no one wants to call by name. Let's stop assuming mistakes. Because in Chicago, 1893, at the World's Columbian Exposition, the evidence becomes too deliberate to ignore. This fair is a cathedral of progress. Electric lights, moving walkways, the first Ferris wheel, 600 acres of white neoclassical buildings, built to sell the future as something clean, bright, and inevitable. And in the electricity building, the crown jewel of the entire fair, there's a bell. The photograph is clear, sharper than the Kiev image, professionally composed. The bell hangs center frame, suspended above a raised platform, 2 meters across, maybe more, bronze polished to a mirror finish. But under that platform, visible in the image, are cables, thick, insulated, running from the base of the bell mount down through the floor, power cables. Not suspension cables, not decoration, power. The official exposition guide, a bound volume of roughly 200 pages handed to visitors, includes a full-page entry on the electricity building. It describes Tesla coils, Edison dynamos, arc lamps, telephone switchboards. And then, in the corner of page 73, a brief mention. Bronze acoustic element demonstrating advanced casting techniques and tonal precision. Casting techniques. Tonal precision, Not one word about the cables, not one word about why a bronze acoustic element needs a direct connection to the building's electrical system. A visitor, name unknown, writes in a letter preserved at the Chicago Historical Society, "We were told not to touch the bell, not for fear of damage, but for safety. A worker standing nearby said the tone can burn skin if one stands too close during a demonstration. I thought he was joking. His face suggested otherwise. The tone can burn skin. That isn't poetry. That isn't exaggeration. It's a warning about physical harm. Sound doesn't burn, heat burns, electrical discharge burns. But if the bell is connected to power, if it isn't just ringing but conducting, if the frequency is being driven and sustained by current running through the bronze, then yes, standing too close could burn." Decades later, another photograph surfaces in a private estate sale. Same exposition, different angle. This one shows the floor around the bell platform. There's dust, normal in a huge building, even during an active exhibition. But the dust has formed a pattern, radial lines, extending outward from the platform in perfect symmetry, like iron filings around a magnet, like ripples in water, frozen mid-spread. It looks like metallic dust, the kind that settles when you machine bronze, when you polish metal, when you grind and file and finish. But metallic dust does not arrange itself into geometry on its own, unless something is pulling it, vibrating it, organizing it through sustained resonance. On the back of the photograph, someone wrote a label, "Electricity Building, August 1893, effect persists approx. 40 seconds post-demonstration." Effect persists, not sound persists, not tone lingers, effect. And 40 seconds is impossibly long. A bell rings, then it dies. Even a perfectly tuned bell, in ideal conditions, doesn't hold a strong tone that long. 40 seconds means something else is sustaining it. Something electrical. Something that keeps the frequency active after the initial strike, long after normal sound should collapse into silence. The exposition runs from May to October. 6 months, 27 million visitors. The bell is mentioned in guidebooks, photographed by professionals and amateurs, seen by thousands. And then, in November, 1 month after the fair closes, it vanishes from the record. No sale documentation, no transfer to a museum, no decommissioning note. The electricity building is partially dismantled for materials reuse, copper wire salvaged, dynamos redistributed, light fixtures sold. But the bell, no inventory entry, no mention in salvage logs. A worker's diary, donated to the Newberry Library in 1947, includes a single line dated November 18, 1893. Removed the platform fixture per directive, told not to discuss details, paid double rate for silence. Paid double rate for silence, not for hazardous work, not for overtime, for not talking. You don't pay workers to stay quiet about moving a decorative bell. You pay them to stay quiet when what they handled, what they witnessed, doesn't match what the public was told. The guide says casting techniques. The photographs show power cables. Visitors report warnings about burns. A worker reports being paid to keep silent. And later, a metallurgist studying the dust pattern photograph will note something that cuts through the fog. The radial symmetry matches electromagnetic field dispersion more than ordinary acoustic resonance. Electromagnetic, not sound. Electricity. This is where the story stops pretending. Chicago doesn't hide the cables. It simply refuses to explain them. It shows you the power connection and then calls it decoration. And that's worse than erasure, because it isn't just hiding the truth. It's asking you to look straight at the evidence and still accept the harmless label. The bell was functional. The cables were necessary. The demonstrations caused physical effects that lasted far longer than sound should. And someone made sure that when you read the official description, all you'd see was a polite line about bronze casting. Now, let's see how many times this repeats. Let's see how far the pattern spreads, and what happens when you map it like a network. Chicago doesn't hide the cables. It just refuses to explain them. And once you recognize that trick, show the evidence, bury the meaning, you start seeing it everywhere. The shipping manifests tell the clearest story. Because ships keep logs, customs agents keep records, weight, composition, origin, destination. Every crate that crosses a border is supposed to leave a clean paper trail, unless someone removes the destination. Maritime archives in Liverpool hold manifests from 1873 to 1914. Most entries look normal, boring, complete. Cargo, textiles, weight 240 kilograms, origin Manchester, destination Boston, recipient Adams & Sons Imports. But scattered through those decades are entries that look like this: cargo, bronze fragments, weight 412 kilograms, origin blank, destination blank, recipient blank. Not redacted, not crossed out, not smudged, blank. As if a ship carried 412 kilograms of bronze across the Atlantic to nobody, from nowhere. And the same pattern appears in other places: French customs logs, German port records, Russian manifests, same weights, same descriptions, same omissions. You can track the bronze by following the numbers. 412 kilograms shows up in Liverpool, Le Havre, Hamburg, Odessa. 608 kilograms appears in Marseille, Genoa, St. Petersburg. The weights are consistent, precise. You don't accidentally ship the exact same mass of bronze fragments to different cities unless you're following a specification, unless someone is building multiple copies of the same thing. But the foundry name, the origin, is missing every time. Not different foundries in the different cities, not regional variations. Missing. In 1889, a British customs inspector files a complaint. The document survives in the National Archives at Kew. Repeated inquiries regarding bronze, shipments yielding no clarity, manifests list, cargo weight and composition, but omit standard declarations of origin and intended recipient. When pressed, shipping agents claim documents were filed correctly at point of departure. Investigation into continental sources produces no corresponding export records. Recommend heightened scrutiny of future shipments. No corresponding export records. That means the bronze is being shipped from ports, logged by weight and composition. But no one at the supposed point of departure has the matching paperwork. It appears on ships without being loaded. It leaves docks without being delivered. The inspector's recommendation goes nowhere. No policy change, no crackdown. 3 months later, another shipment of 412 kilograms arrives in Liverpool. Same blank fields. By the time you reach the 1890s, the omissions stop looking like accidents and start looking like a system. A ledger from the port of Hamburg, dated 1892, shows 11 separate shipments over 16 months. Everyone lists bronze. Everyone lists a precise weight. Everyone omits origin and destination. But there's something else in that ledger: crate numbers. Each shipment is marked with an alphanumeric code: B447, B502, B618. Normal practice. You label crates so they can be tracked. Except these codes show up out of sequence. B447 is logged in Hamburg, March 1892. Then B447 appears again in Le Havre, September 1892. Same identifier, different port, 6 months apart. Either the same crate traveled between cities without being logged, or 2 different crates were given the same identifier. And if that's true, if multiple crates share the same serial across different ports, then this isn't local sloppiness. Someone is coordinating it. Someone is using the same coding. That system in France, Germany, England, Russia. Someone is manufacturing, shipping, and distributing these objects through a unified network. One that leaves no origin, no destination, and no recipient. A French archivist notes in 1931, while cataloging old shipping records, anomalous entries common in late 19th century bronze trade. Pattern suggests deliberate omission rather than clerical negligence. No evidence of fraud or smuggling. Cargo appears to have been legally transported. Purpose remains unclear. Purpose remains unclear because you can't track what was never officially sent. You can't investigate what was never officially received. The bronze moves across Europe like a ghost shipment, logged yet invisible, weighed yet anonymous. And the only constants are the numbers, the weights, the repeated codes, the same patterns reappearing in ports separated by thousands of kilometers. 412 kilograms, 608, 8, 134, always precise, always the same. Someone knew exactly how much bronze was required. Someone knew exactly where it needed to go, but they made sure no one else would. The manifests prove the pattern exists. The blank fields prove someone didn't want it traced. And the crate numbers, duplicated across cities, out of sequence, impossible to explain as routine error, prove this wasn't random distribution. It was a network. Now let's see what happens when someone finds the missing piece. Let's see what happens when a blueprint appears that should not exist. Anne suddenly explains what all this bronze was actually for. It was a network, and networks need infrastructure. The blueprints surface in Dresden, 1958. A demolition crew is clearing a pre-war municipal building scheduled for reconstruction. In the basement archives, untouched since 1945, they find rolled architectural drawings tied with frayed twine. Most are ordinary water systems, street plans, sewer layouts. But one drawing is different. It shows a tower, a circular foundation, 32 meters in diameter, a central column rising 40 meters, and around that column, in concentric rings, a series of chambers labeled in German, Resonanzkammer, resonance chamber. The date stamp reads 1887. The architect's name is missing, but in the margin there's a note, faded yet precise. Per Kiev harmonic specification. Sustained frequency registers maintained via structural amplification. Kiev harmonics. That isn't a generic phrase. That's a reference. A technical anchor tied to a specific place. The same place where fragments appear in 1896. The same place where bronze vibrated at 112 hertz. But this blueprint is dated 1887, 9 years before the Kiev exhibition, which means someone in Dresden knew the specification before the public ever saw the objects. The drawing includes measurements: foundation depth, 8 meters, wall thickness, 1.2 meters of reinforced stone. Interior chambers arranged in a radial layout, each separated by copper-lined partitions. Copper-lined, not decorative copper, conductive copper. The same material threaded through St. Petersburg, the same material hiding beneath the Chicago platform. And the blueprint shows no religious iconography, no civic ornament, no tower aesthetics. It's purely functional. A machine diagram dressed up as architecture. At the top, in the bell chamber, another notation appears. Bronze element installation per standardized specification. See Foundry reference B412. B412. The same code that shows up in shipping manifests Hamburg, Le Havre, Liverpool, the same kind of identifier attached to crates with no origin, no destination, no recipient. This blueprint names what those crates were feeding. But then comes the problem. There's no record of this tower ever being built. Dresden City Planning Archives from 1887 through 1900 show no construction permits for a resonance tower, no budget allocation, no public announcement, no newspaper note, no debate, no ceremony. On paper, it never existed. And yet, in 1910, an aerial photograph of Dresden's outskirts shows something. A circular foundation, 32 meters across, partially overgrown with grass. The photograph comes from a municipal survey. No caption, no explanation. Just a numbered grid reference, like the camera wasn't meant to notice what it caught. By 1914, the foundation is gone, filled in. A small line in a city planning document reads, "Abandoned foundation, origin unknown, filled per municipal order, area repurposed as public garden." Abandoned foundation, origin unknown. But the blueprint exists. The measurements match, the location aligns. Someone built it, someone buried it, and someone made sure the official record never used the words that would connect it. A groundskeeper's log from 1912, found in the same archive bundle, adds one more thread. A maintenance note. Circular area continues to exhibit unusual soil compaction. Metal fragments recovered during routine planting. Fragments appear to be copper fittings, arranged in concentric patterns beneath surface, removed and discarded per supervisor instruction. Copper fittings. In concentric circles. Exactly what the blueprint shows. Exactly what the chamber design requires. So the tower was built, the chambers were lined, the system was installed, and then it was erased. Not smashed, not publicly demolished, filled in, buried, turned into a garden so nobody would ask why there's a 32-meter circular foundation with no official structure attached to it. But the blueprint survives, and it does something the manifests couldn't. It names the system, resonance chamber, sustained frequency registers, structural amplification. This isn't a bell tower. This isn't decoration. This is infrastructure, designed to maintain specific frequencies across a controlled space. And the note, per Kiev harmonic specification, means Dresden wasn't the origin. It was a replication. Someone in Kiev developed the specification, someone in Dresden built a copy, and someone with authority over both places ensured neither installation left a clean public record. The blueprint contains one more detail. In the bottom right corner, partly blurred by water damage, a smaller line of script. Installation series, Prague, Munich, Dresden, Vienna. Interval synchronization required. Installation series, not one tower, 4. Prague, Munich, Dresden, Vienna, 4 cities, 4 resonance chambers, all built to the same specification, all designed to operate on synchronized intervals, and all missing from official construction. Records, all erased from municipal archives, but the blueprint survives. The foundation photograph survives. The groundskeeper's note about copper fittings survives. Enough to prove the network wasn't only shipping bronze, it was building receiver stations. And someone worked very hard to make sure those stations never entered the history books. Now, let's follow the network to its harshest suppression. Let's see what happens when the system is built, activated, and then violently shut down within the span of a single year. The network wasn't only shipping bronze, it was building receiver stations. And in Birmingham, 1902, someone was still manufacturing the bells themselves. The Foundry sits on the edge of the industrial district. Classic Victorian factory architecture, brick walls, iron frames, tall windows stained black by decades of coal smoke. City inspectors arrive in October 1902. The place is abandoned, but not abandoned in the normal way. The report, filed with the Birmingham Municipal Archives, describes the scene. Premises found unoccupied, interior in state of active operation, tools in place, forges still warm, workbenches bearing unfinished castings. No evidence of gradual closure. Impression given, work halted mid-process. Mid-process. Not shut down for a weekend, not closed for repairs, not winding down, stopped. Inside, inspectors find 6 bronze bells in different stages of completion, each one roughly 1 meter in diameter, each one coated in a thin layer of graphite dust. Graphite. That's not a standard finishing material for bronze bells. Graphite is conductive. It belongs in electrical applications, brushes, electrodes, resistance components. So, why coat a bell in graphite unless you want it to carry current? The inspector's report continues. Castings bear unusual interior modifications, deep grooves spiraling from crown to rim, purpose unclear. Several bells exhibit copper wire embedded in surface, terminating at mounting points. Design inconsistent with traditional bell construction. Copper wire, embedded in the bronze. Not decorative inlay, not a surface wrap. Embedded, threaded through the casting during the pour, permanently fused into the metal. You don't do that unless the wire is part of the function. But the most revealing discovery isn't on the shop floor, it's in the foreman's office. A payroll ledger sits open on the desk. The final entry is dated October 3rd, 102, midweek. Mid-month. The next page is blank. Pinned to the ledger with a straight pin is a handwritten note. No signature, just 4 lines. Work halted by instruction from above. Molds destroyed per directive. No inquiry permitted. Final wages distributed in full. Instruction from above. The same phrase that appears in Kiev. The same kind of authority that rewrote St. Petersburg's completion. Dates. But here, the order goes further. Molds destroyed, not stored, not archived, destroyed. You destroy molds when you don't want replication, when you want to cut the design off at the root, when you want production to stop permanently, not pause. And no inquiry permitted reads like a preemptive muzzle. Someone expected questions. Someone knew this would look wrong, so they shut down the conversation before it could start. The inspectors cataloged the bells, 6 unfinished prototypes, and each one carries a chalk marking on the interior surface. Electrical, test series C. Electrical, not ceremonial, not decorative, not acoustic. Electrical. That single word confirms what the photographs, the blueprints, and the shipping manifests have been hinting at all along. These bells were designed to interface with electrical systems, to conduct, to drive resonance, to sustain frequency through power. The report includes one final observation. One bell, though unfinished and lacking clapper, produced faint tone when struck lightly with wooden mallet. Tone sustained for approximately 22 seconds. Duration unexplained given incomplete state of casting. Metal surface remained slightly warm to touch for several minutes following strike. 22 seconds, warm to the touch. From an unfinished prototype, if an incomplete bell, coated in graphite, threaded with copper, can hold a tone that long and retain heat, what could a finished version do? And what could a network of finished versions accomplish? Installed, inside resonance chambers, synchronized across cities, tied into conductive architecture, powered through cables nobody mentions? The Birmingham bells are confiscated. The official reason, inspection of unregistered industrial equipment. They're moved to a municipal storage facility. The inventory lists them as bronze scrap, origin unknown, awaiting disposal authorization. Bronze scrap. 6 precision-engineered prototypes marked for electrical testing, embedded with conductive materials. Reduced to scrap. By 1904, the storage records show the bells as disposed of. No method, no details, no sale log, no salvage receipt. Only a final line. Items removed from inventory, matter closed. The Foundry building is sold in 1905, converted into a textile warehouse, forges dismantled, workbenches removed. By 1910, there's no physical trace the place ever cast bells at all. But the inspector's report survives. The payroll, ledger survives. The note, molds destroyed per directive, survives. And most importantly, the chalk marking survives in the written record. Electrical Test Series C, which means there was a Test Series A and a Test Series B, which means Birmingham wasn't the first attempt. It was the third. And someone with enough authority to halt a functioning foundry, destroy molds, confiscate prototypes, and bury the paperwork decided that Test Series C would be the last. So the real question becomes unavoidable. What did Series A and Series B accomplish? That forced this kind of aggressive suppression. Now, let's leave Europe. Let's see what happens when the same system appears in a colony dressed as religion, built with the same impossible precision. The question is simple, and it won't go away. What did Test Series A and Test Series B accomplish that required this level of suppression? One answer might be waiting in Kolkata, because in 1905, 3 years after Birmingham is shut down, the same design appears in India, not in a foundry, not at a World's Fair, in a temple. The Kalighat temple complex undergoes renovation. British colonial records describe it as modernization of religious facilities to accommodate increased pilgrimage traffic. Modernization, a clean word, a safe word. But the photographs tell a different story. A missionary's private collection, donated to the British Library in 1962, includes images taken during that renovation. One photograph shows the temple's interior meditation chamber. Above the altar, a bronze bell suspended by chains. At first glance, it looks ordinary, almost unremarkable. But beneath the bell, mounted on a wooden platform, are vertical rods, metal, precisely spaced. 8 of them, arranged in a circle. Tuning fork rods, not decorative, not structural, tuning forks. The kind used in acoustic experiments, the kind that respond at specific frequencies, either when struck or when exposed to the right resonant tone, too precise to be religious ornament, too functional to be purely symbolic. A British engineer stationed in Kolkata writes in his diary, March 1906, attended ceremony at local temple, bell installation described as traditional blessing device. Design appeared distinctly European in origin, inconsistent with regional metalworking tradition. Question temple administrator regarding origin. Response evasive. Claim design provided by benefactor from the West with expertise in sacred acoustics. Benefactor from the West. Sacred acoustics. It's the same language pattern you've already heard. Call it sacred, call it traditional, call it cultural, and nobody asks why the metalwork looks engineered. The engineer continues. Upon closer inspection, noted faint markings on bell interior. Appeared to be European script, possibly German or Russian. Administrator declined to permit. Detailed examination. European script. On a temple bell in colonial India. And the timing is hard to ignore. The same year Birmingham's molds are destroyed, a functionally similar system appears in Kolkata, installed as religious infrastructure, protected by tradition, hidden behind ceremony. But there's more. In 1973, a team conducting infrared survey work on historic structures in Kolkata examines the temple complex. The technology is new. The goal is practical. Map structural integrity, detect hidden voids, locate concealed architectural features, and the survey finds something that shouldn't be there. Behind the altar wall, beneath plaster and decorative tile, are cables, copper, insulated, running from the bell chamber down through the foundation. The survey report, filed with the Archaeological Survey of India, notes presence of electrical wiring inconsistent with reported construction date of 1905. Material analysis suggests early 20th century European manufacture. Purpose unknown. Cables appear to terminate in foundation without connection to modern electrical system. Cables inside the walls, installed during the 1905 renovation, terminating in the foundation with no visible modern function, which means they were functional at the time of installation, connected to something that no longer exists, or was removed. Then the records take a sharp turn. The temple annex is demolished in 1914. The official reason, structural instability due to monsoon damage. But there's no clear trail of structural collapse leading up to it. No long chain of repair requests. No engineering reports warning of imminent failure. Just a brief municipal notice in August 1914. Kaligate annex structure to be demolished and rebuilt per updated safety standards. Interior fixtures to be removed and stored pending reinstallation. Interior fixtures. That's the bell, the rods, the hidden cabling. A storage record lists. Bronze bell, traditional design, religious significance, awaiting temple reconstruction. The temple is never reconstructed. The bell never returns to inventory, and photographs, surveys, and written descriptions of the interior installation vanish from the temple archive, almost all of them. Except one remaining trace survives in the margins of a British colonial administrator's ledger, dated September 1914. Temple interior records confiscated per directive of the Home Office. Matter related to public safety. No further documentation permitted. Public safety, the same umbrella excuse, the same kind of justification that appears when these systems get too visible. A bell inside a temple becomes a public safety concern, and 9 years of documentation disappears overnight. But not everything disappears. The missionaries' photographs survive. The engineer's diary survives. The 1973 infrared survey survives, enough to prove the shape of it. Someone shipped a European-designed acoustic device into India. Someone installed it in a temple. Someone ran insulated copper cables through the walls into the foundation. And when authorities decided it had to go, they didn't just remove hardware. They erased the paperwork. The pattern is global now. Europe, North America, Asia, different settings, different labels, different stories, same design, and the same response. Confiscate, demolish, erase. But here's the problem. For every installation someone tries to bury, something leaks. A photograph, a diary line, a survey report. Fragments that refuse to match the official story. And when you collect those fragments, when you line them up in time, in geography, and in technical detail, they form a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. Now, let's see what happens when that pattern collapses under its own contradictions. Let's see. What happens when the official explanation stops making sense entirely? They form a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. And for a moment, staring at shipping manifests, blueprints, synchronized installations, it feels like we've finally found it. A global network, coordinated, deliberate. Built across continents with precision engineering, then hidden in plain sight. But then the records fracture in a way that doesn't fit the neat explanation. 1918. The Great War ends. And suddenly, the bronze starts moving again. Not in ghost shipments with blank manifests, not as fragments labeled decorative, in bulk orders, documented, public. The first appears in a French municipal ledger, February 1919. Bronze requisition for memorial construction. Weight, 840 kilograms. Purpose, peace monument, civic remembrance. Peace monument. The weight matches earlier shipments, but the context has changed. This isn't hidden infrastructure. This is announced civic architecture, built in daylight. Approved in meetings, printed in newspapers, similar orders appear across Europe. London, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, all bronze, all public monuments, all justified with the same language. Commemoration of the fallen, symbols of peace and remembrance. For about 2 years, it looks like the pattern is over. Like the network dissolved into ordinary post-war reconstruction. Except, the inventory doesn't add up. A British Ministry of Supply document from 1920 lists bronze surplus from wartime requisitions, standard accounting, metal recovered from decommissioned equipment, melted down, redistributed for civilian use. Total listed, 4,200 kilograms. But the memorial orders between 1919 and 1921 consume 6,800 kilograms. That leaves a deficit of 2,600 kilograms. The surplus cannot cover the orders, which means more bronze is coming from somewhere else. And a footnote in the ledger admits it quietly. Additional supply sourced from pre-war municipal storage. Items previously classified under obsolete infrastructure. Obsolete infrastructure, not scrap, not salvage, infrastructure, which means cities were storing bronze, cataloged, inventoried, maintained, under a label that implies it once had a function. And after the war, that stored bronze is quietly redirected into public monuments, places where nobody asks what it originally was. But then another problem appears. 1921. A municipal inspector in Hamburg files a routine report on a new war memorial, materials, design, timeline. Buried in the technical notes, bronze composition exhibits unusual electrical conductivity. Recommendation: avoid installation near tram lines or electrical substations due to potential interference patterns. Electrical conductivity, interference patterns. That isn't normal memorial bronze. That reads like the conductive alloy from Birmingham, the same material linked to copper wire, graphite coating, electrical testing. So now it looks like someone is taking devices built for powered resonance and recasting them into statues, and someone else is noticing the metal still behaves wrong. The inspector's recommendation goes into the file. The memorial is installed anyway, 2 blocks from the nearest tram line. 6 months later, another note appears in the city archives. War memorial relocated per municipal order. Original site experiencing unexplained electrical interference affecting tram service. Memorial repositioned to park location, away from electrical infrastructure. Unexplained electrical interference from a statue. Cast from bronze previously classified as obsolete infrastructure. This is where the contradiction locks in. If the bells were only decorative, if the network was merely scattered acoustic experiments, then melting them down and recasting them as monuments should neutralize whatever made them special, but it doesn't. The metal retains properties that interfere with electrical systems, properties strong enough to force the relocation of a public monument so it stops disrupting a tram line, which means the function wasn't only in the shape, it was in the material itself, and whoever ordered the recasting either didn't understand that or understood it perfectly. A letter surfaces in the Vienna Municipal Archives, dated March 1922. An engineer writes to the city planning office, recommend immediate inspection of all post-war bronze installations. Reports from Hamburg, Berlin, and Prague suggest certain memorial alloys producing measurable electromagnetic effects. Unclear if this represents safety concern or merely curiosity. Advise caution pending further analysis. The letter is stamped, received and filed. No inspection ordered, no analysis commissioned, no follow-up trail, just filed. Because by 1922, the network isn't simply being hidden anymore, it's being renamed. The bells become heritage, the cables disappear, the resonance chambers are filled in and turned into gardens. And the bronze, precisely engineered, electrically conductive, interference-producing bronze, gets melted down and recast into symbols of peace, not destroyed, repurposed. So, when someone asks, what happened to the acoustic machines? The answer becomes almost unbearable. They're standing in your town square. You walk past them every day. You just call them something else now. But nobody ignored this system. Someone dismantled it. Someone redistributed it. Someone disguised it as remembrance. And the real question is brutal. Why go to all that effort unless the system actually worked? Now, let's see what happens when someone tries to document what this system might have done. Let's see what happens when the science almost catches up and then gets pushed back into the dark. The question is brutal. Why go to all that effort unless the system actually worked? Because destruction draws attention, confiscation raises questions, but renaming, turning something functional into something symbolic, that makes it invisible. By 1925, the transformation is almost complete. The bells that once hung in exhibition halls are now civic monuments. Bronze fragments once cataloged as acoustic ornaments are melted into war memorials. Resonance chambers become gardens. Copper-lined towers become foundation remnants, shrugged off as unknown 19th century infrastructure. And the people who walk past these objects every day have no idea they're looking at the remains of a machine. This is where the emotional weight settles, because history doesn't just forget technology. Sometimes it reclassifies it. It takes what was built with precision and intent and files it under safer labels: heritage, faith, decoration, remembrance. The practical parts disappear first. The rods, the cables, the chambers, the logbooks. What remains are objects stripped of context. Beautiful, yes. Historically interesting, sure, but functionally dead. A museum curator in Brussels writes in 1929, cataloging bronze fragments donated by a private estate. 6 pieces, origin uncertain. Interior grooves suggest specialized acoustic application. No documentation provided by donor. Classified as decorative metalwork, late 19th century. Display not recommended. Insufficient historical context. Insufficient historical context. The context existed. It was in the shipping manifests with no destinations, in the blueprints labeled resonance chamber, in inspector reports describing electromagnetic interference around memorial statues. But that context was never assembled into one narrative. It stayed scattered, across cities, across languages, across archives that never spoke to each other. So the curator does what curators are trained to do: label it decorative, store it in a basement, move on. By the 1930s, even the memory of something strange begins to fade. A researcher in Vienna tries to compile a history of 19th century bell founding. She requests access to municipal archives, church records, exhibition catalogs. She finds bells, hundreds of them, names, dates, donors, dedications. But when she asks for the parts that explain function, installation records, blueprints, technical specifications, foundry correspondence, the trail goes cold. Her notes, preserved in the Austrian State Archive, include this observation: remarkable gap in documentation between 1870 and 1910. Bells frequently mentioned in exhibition guides and civic reports, yet no coherent technical record survives. Design specifications appear to have been systematically excluded from public archives. Private collections offer only fragments, sketches, partial manifests, anecdotal descriptions. Comprehensive study impossible without access to foundry records, which appear to be lost or deliberately withheld. Lost or deliberately withheld. She's right. But she doesn't push it further, because without proof, it becomes speculation. And speculation doesn't get published, it doesn't get funded, it doesn't get archived as fact. So, her research becomes another fragment, another thread that suggests a missing structure but cannot force it into daylight. This is the quiet aftermath, not dramatic suppression, not midnight raids, just bureaucratic entropy. Records misfiled, context separated, fragments stored without labels, engineers reassigned, foundries demolished, witnesses dying without memoirs. History doesn't always need a single villain to erase something. Sometimes it just needs time and enough disinterest. But there's one exception. Because while civic authorities reclassified, the Bells and archivists filed fragments without context, someone else kept paying attention. Scientists, not many, not loudly, not in headlines, but a few. Physicists who noticed that certain frequencies propagate strangely through dense city spaces. Electrical engineers who mapped urban power grids and found unexplained fluctuations near old structures. Acousticians studying resonance and stumbling into patterns that shouldn't exist in unplanned architecture. They didn't call it a network. They didn't use myth labels. They measured, they logged, they published in obscure journals where nobody outside a tiny circle would look. And one of them, working in Vienna in the 1920s, almost connected it all. His name appears in a withdrawn paper, a private sketch, a set of measurements that match Kiev and St. Petersburg down to millimeter precision. He never called it a machine, but he mapped it like one. And when his work got too close, when his diagrams started pointing towards something someone didn't want named, it disappeared. Not the man, the work. Filed, withdrawn, confiscated. The same word that keeps appearing in the margins of this story. St. Petersburg, Paris, Kolkata, confiscated per directive. Matter closed, but the sketch survives, the measurements survive, and they reveal what the public was never supposed to notice. The bells weren't placed randomly, they followed a pattern, a geographic logic, a design network. Now let's meet the physicist who almost proved it. But the sketch survives, the measurements survive, and they show something no one was supposed to see. His name is Dr. Anton Weisfeld, physicist. Vienna Institute of Technology. Specialty: how low-frequency sound moves through dense urban environments. In 1923, he publishes a paper titled On the Transmission of Low-Frequency Sound Through Architectural Structures. It looks normal on the surface, peer-reviewed, roughly 30 pages of equations, measurements, diagrams. It explains how certain frequencies, especially those below 200 hertz, can travel through stone, metal, and earth more efficiently than through open air. The paper is cited twice, filed in university libraries, then forgotten. But there is a second paper, one that never reaches print. It is discovered in 1968, tucked inside a private collection donated to the Vienna Technical Museum. The donor, Weisfeld's niece, doesn't know what it is. She describes it as Uncle's unfinished work on bell acoustics. The manuscript has a title that doesn't sound unfinished at all: Acoustic Transmission of Electrical Potential Through Resonant Bronze Networks. It's dated November 1924, and it was withdrawn before peer review. The opening paragraph states, preliminary measurements conducted at sites in Vienna, Prague, and St. Petersburg reveal anomalous persistence of low-frequency vibration in proximity to 19th century bronze installations. Frequencies measured 108 to 114 hertz. Decay rate, inconsistent with standard acoustic models. Hypothesis, architectural integration of resonant elements creates sustained field effect, analogous to standing wave propagation in radio transmission. Analogous to radio transmission, not as a metaphor, as a technical model. Weisfeld isn't suggesting bells that sound like radio. He's suggesting a system that behaves like early radio towers, not transmitting messages, but sustaining a frequency across distance through architecture and resonance. The manuscript includes measurements: Vienna, St. Stephen's Cathedral, bell chamber. Measured frequency, 111.8 hertz. Decay time, 41 seconds. Prague, Old Town Hall, bell tower, measured frequency, 112.3 hertz. Decay time, 38 seconds. St. Petersburg, St. Isaac's Cathedral, dome structure, measured frequency 112.1 hertz, decay time 43 seconds. The frequencies cluster around 112 hertz, the same frequency recorded in Kiev, 1896. But the more disturbing detail is the decay time. 41 seconds, 38 seconds, 43 seconds. Bronze doesn't sustain tone for 40 seconds, not naturally, not without amplification. Weisfeld notes, decay duration exceeds physical expectations for bronze resonance by factor of 8 to 12, suggests external energy input or architectural amplification, mechanism not present in standard bell tower design. External energy input. He doesn't write electricity in that sentence, but the implication sits there anyway. The manuscript also contains a map. Europe, 47 cities marked with dots, lines connecting them. The label reads, Potential Resonance Node Distribution, 1870 to 1910. The cities match what we've already seen in fragments and paperwork. Paris, St. Petersburg, Chicago, Birmingham, Prague, Munich, Dresden, Vienna, Kolkata. 47 locations where these bronze installations appear within the same 40-year window. But Weisfeld does something nobody else did. He plots them by distance, and a geometric pattern emerges. Not random distribution, not just big cities, not simply cultural centers or population hubs. The spacing is interval-based, roughly 300 to 500 kilometers apart, close enough that a sustained low-frequency wave could, in theory, propagate between nodes, far enough that each site behaves like an independent station. Weisfeld writes, distribution pattern inconsistent with random civic development. Spacing suggests deliberate placement for optimal acoustic interference. If resonant synchronization were maintained across network, sustained field propagation theoretically achievable across continental distances. Theoretically achievable. He isn't claiming it definitely worked. He's saying the design would allow it to work. Then the manuscript stops. The final page contains one short paragraph. Further study requires access to installation blueprints and foundry records. Requests submitted to municipal archives in Vienna, Prague, Dresden, pending response. There is no response. Instead, 3 months later, a notation appears in Vienna Institute of Technology, Administrative Records, Weisfeld Research. Project discontinued per external advisory. Materials confiscated under provision for public interest review. Further inquiry not authorized. External advisory, not university administration, not peer review. External. Weisfeld never publishes again on acoustic transmission. His later work shifts to thermodynamics and materials science, safe topics, non-sensitive topics. But the manuscript survives for one reason. His niece kept it in a box with family letters, not in an archive file, not in an institute drawer, just a forgotten stack of paper preserved by accident. And when researchers finally read it in 1968, they find something else. Tucked between pages 12 and 13 is a hand-drawn sketch, Europe again. The same 47 cities. But this time, the connecting lines aren't random. They follow old Roman roads, medieval pilgrimage routes, trade paths that predate modern rail networks. And in the corner, in Weisfeld's handwriting, if the interval is maintained, the field persists. If the interval is maintained, not if the bells ring, not if the towers stand. If the interval, the spacing, the synchronization, the calculated distances is maintained, then the field persists. He mapped it. He measured it. He came within one published paper of naming it, and someone made sure the paper never saw print. Now, let's see what else disappeared. Let's see what happens when the data itself becomes too dangerous to keep. He mapped it. He measured it. He came within one published paper of naming it, and someone made sure that paper never saw print. But Weisfeld wasn't the first person to notice the pattern. 10 years earlier, in Lisbon, someone else was tracking something that looked almost the same. Only they weren't watching bells. They were watching compasses. The Portuguese Naval Observatory. From 1898 to 1914, its main job is simple and vital: Map Earth's magnetic field for maritime navigation. Routine science, essential work. Ships live and die on accurate compass readings. But in 1914, the observatory compiles an atlas that goes beyond navigation. The Atlas Magnetico de Lisboa is intended to document local magnetic variation, how compass needles drift away from true north because of mineral deposits, geology, and urban metal infrastructure. Normal stuff. Predictable stuff. Except this atlas contains something it shouldn't. City-to-city magnetic fluctuation data. Not just Lisbon, Paris, Madrid, Vienna, Prague, St. Petersburg. And the fluctuations do not match what geology would predict. The atlas shows subtle deviations, fractions of a degree, that appear, vanish, then return, not randomly, on intervals. A margin note on plate 17 reads, "Anomalous readings persist at 28-day intervals, strongest during evening hours. Origin undetermined, correlation with lunar phase suspected but unconfirmed. 28-day intervals. That isn't drift, that isn't background noise, that's periodicity, that's a pattern." The atlas includes a chart, dates, times, compass deviation measurements collected across multiple cities, and the deviations don't strike everywhere at the same moment. They move across Europe like a wave. Paris on day 1, Prague on day 3, Vienna on day 6, St. Petersburg on day 9, propagation. As if something is traveling between those cities, slowly, measurably, on a schedule. The atlas compilers write, "Pattern consistency suggests artificial source. Natural magnetic phenomena do not exhibit synchronized periodicity across continental distances. Recommend further observation and potential correlation with civic infrastructure development." Civic infrastructure development. They don't say bells, they don't say resonance chambers. But the implication is clear. Whatever is producing the magnetic effect might be tied to something humans built. The atlas is scheduled for publication in June 1914. It never appears. An administrative log from the observatory, dated May 27, 1914, contains a short notice. Atlas publication suspended pending review. All data related to cross-continental magnetic observations, confiscated under directive of the Ministry of the Interior. Further study prohibited. Staff instructed to discontinue recording of anomalous patterns. Confiscated, the same word, the same move, the same silence. But one page survives. A fisherman, name never recorded, buys waste paper from the observatory in 1915 to use as fire starter. Among the scraps, he finds a single chart page from the atlas. He keeps it, not because he understands it, because the printing looks decorative. He frames it, hangs it in his home. That page reappears in 1979 during an estate auction. A researcher from the University of Lisbon recognizes the observatory seal. The chart shows magnetic deviation measurements from 14 European cities over 6 months in 1913. And the pattern is unmistakable. Every 28 days, compass needles in these cities deviate by 0.02 to 0.05 degrees. The deviation lasts roughly 6 to 8 hours. Then it returns to baseline. The cities listed, Paris, Lyon, Munich, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Bucharest, Odessa, St. Petersburg, Riga, Copenhagen, Hamburg, Amsterdam, Brussels, 14 cities. The same names that keep showing up, on maps, in manifests, in scattered records. The same kind of distribution Weisfeld later plotted. And, at the bottom of the chart, a handwritten note appears. Transmissions of unknown origin. Strongest correlation with late night hours, 22 aus 4, erasure. Effect diminishes with distance from central node. Recommend triangulation study to identify source. Transmissions, not fluctuations. Not odd readings, transmissions. The compiler is treating this like a signal, something being sent and received. But there is no triangulation study. There is no follow-up. Because 6 weeks after this chart is created, the atlas is confiscated and all further observation is prohibited. And 3 months after that, World War I begins. By 1918, the observatory's magnetic research program is discontinued, staff reassigned, equipment repurposed for military communication research. The atlas becomes a footnote, a failed publication, a curiosity. But the single surviving page tells a different story. It describes a network producing measurable effects, not just acoustic, not just architectural, magnetic, predictable, periodic, detectable across hundreds of kilometers. And someone decided that information was too dangerous to publish, not because it was wrong, because it was right. Because if it was right, if installation spaced across Europe could produce synchronized magnetic pulses on 28-day intervals, then what Weisfeld mapped wasn't theory, it was infrastructure. And what the atlas recorded wasn't anomaly, it was operation. The system worked, not perfectly, not forever, but it worked. And then it was dismantled, the bells recast, the records confiscated, the research prohibited, not to hide a myth, to hide a method.